Namaskar everyone. I hope you all are doing well and today we will explore the ancient Indian wisdom of spatial awareness. So these will be the objectives of this lecture. First, we will have an overview of ancient Indian geospatial knowledge. We will try to understand the significance of historical records in understanding geography. We will also try to understand the methods of locating and analyzing ancient knowledge sites. So let's begin our journey with a fundamental question. Like, how did ancient India understand space? And not just as land to occupy, but as something sacred, alive, and interconnected with cosmic rhythms. The geospatial knowledge of ancient India was not limited to maps and measurements. It was deeply philosophical, cultural, and ecological. And when we explore texts like the Rig Veda, Mahabharata, or Puranas, we are not just reading mythology, but we are looking at records of rivers, routes, forests, settlements, and trade hubs, encoded with layers of geographical meaning. Places like Kashi, Kurukshetra, and Ujjain were not just dots on the map, they were kshetras or sacred geographies, defined by astronomical alignments, ritual significance, and ecological consciousness. Moreover, knowledge systems like Vastu Shastra and Jyotish Shastra embedded directionality, elevation, wind flow, and solar movement into the planning of temples, towns, and even homes. So today, we are not just looking at history, we are decoding a blueprint. And ancient knowledge sites were not just structures, they were intelligent responses to terrain, climate, and cosmic order. And there is so much for modern geographers and planners to learn from them. In ancient India, geography was never just about landforms or location, it was a dialogue between the physical world and the philosophical mind and the spiritual soul. Geospatial knowledge was deeply integrated with the environment and metaphysical thought. Space or Akash was not an empty void, but it was considered as a living presence. And places were not inert, they were active, responsive, and often sacred. So basically, sacred geography played a central role in shaping how people understood the land. Like rivers were goddesses, mountains were guardians, forests were seats of wisdom, and every direction carried a spiritual quality. For instance, the east was associated with new beginnings, the rising sun, and the knowledge. And when it comes to reading the ancient texts, the Vedas, Upanishads, or even epic narratives like the Ramayana, we find a rich tapestry where space and place are layered with ethical and ecological meanings. A desh or region was not just a zone, it had a specific dharma based on its terrain, community, and climate. And this worldview invites us to reconsider our modern maps, not as neutral grids, but as living, breathing landscapes with stories, values, and responsibilities embedded within them. Now, let's explore one of the most fascinating aspects of Indian geospatial imaginations or sacred sites. In Indian traditions, geography and spirituality were inseparable. For example, temples were not randomly located, but they were often built at geomagnetic energy spots on riverbanks, hilltops, or confluences. It was chosen for their cosmic alignments and natural power. And pilgrimage routes like the Char Dham or the Kumbh Mela circuits were not just religious circuits, they were geocultural networks that mapped the spiritual landscape onto the physical land. And mountains like the Himalayas were not just barriers or backdrops, they were seen as the abode of Shiva. And rivers like the Ganga were goddesses, and forests were sanctuaries of sages and divinities. Even today, many tribal and rural communities in India worship groves, hills, or stones not as symbols but as living beings. And this connection between landforms and divinity created what we call sacred geography, a way of reading the land not just for its utility but for its sanctity. Imagine if today's city planning or environmental policies could see the land not just as a resource but as a relative. That's the kind of shift ancient Indian geography invites us to consider. Ancient Indian geospatial knowledge was not just intuitive, it was deeply astronomical and mathematically grounded. People used nakshatras or the lunar constellations not only for timekeeping but also to orient themselves in space. Solstices and equinoxes played a crucial role in marking agricultural seasons, temple alignments, and ritual calendars. And the calendar itself was a cosmological map. Like time was space made visible. And if we talk about the Vastu Shastra, the ancient science of architecture, it is a powerful example of this kind of integration. Like it's not just about building design, it's about harmonizing structures with the energies of the cosmos. Orientation to cardinal directions, the flow of air and light, the placement of rooms, and all were carefully determined to align with natural and cosmic laws. So, in this system, a house was not just a shelter, it was a microcosm of the universe. And yes, India had ancient cartography too. Maps inscribed on copper plates, temple floor plans, and pilgrimage route sketches found in the manuscripts. And these were not just literal, they carried symbolic meaning, mapping not just geography but ethics, memory, and sacred purpose. Together, these practices show a culture where space was understood as dynamic, alive, and sacred, like a perspective that challenges modern notions of neutral geography. Let's now turn to some of the most iconic knowledge centers of ancient India, sites like Takshila, Nalanda, and Patliputra. These were not just urban settlements, they were epicenters of intellectual, cultural, and spiritual life. Takshila, for example, was one of the earliest universities in the world, attracting students from across Asia. Nalanda had a vast residential complex with a planned layout, libraries, and lecture halls, carefully aligned with environmental and astronomical considerations. Patliputra, the capital of several dynasties, was designed with both strategic and sacred geography in mind. Its location at the confluence of rivers was significant both politically and spiritually as well. So, what's fascinating is how the Vedic texts themselves served as geographical records. Like the Rig Veda mentions rivers, mountains, and tribes with remarkable detail. So these references help us reconstruct early spatial understanding and show how place was always embedded in meaning. Cultural and religious texts like the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and Puranas also describe journeys across regions, sacred geographies, and cosmological cities, linking space with dharma, memory, and identity. So, geography in Indian tradition was not a backdrop, it was a living stage for ethics, knowledge, and cosmic connection. Now, how did ancient Indians map the world around them? Let's look at the techniques embedded in their texts and practices. Unlike modern cartography that relies on physical measurements and coordinate systems, ancient Indian mapping combined astronomy, geography, and culture into a seamless worldview. For example, the position of stars or nakshatras, the solar and lunar calendars, and the changing seasons were all used to understand and organize space. Temples were often aligned with celestial events, sunrises during solstices, or specific planetary positions during consecration ceremonies. Like in terms of records, we find spatial descriptions in texts like the Surya Siddhanta, a sophisticated astronomical manual, and in the Puranas, which describe sacred lands, rivers, and pilgrimage circuits in symbolic geography. Today, researchers are using GIS, satellite imagery, and digital humanities method to decode these ancient spatial references. For example, by mapping pilgrimage routes mentioned in scriptures or reconstructing layouts of vanished cities using textual clues and topographical data. And the fusion of ancient insights and modern tools is not just about recovering the past, it's about reinterpreting our relationship with land, sky, and self in today's context. Let's now look at how sacred geography shaped not just temples but entire patterns of settlement and movement in ancient India. Temple construction was never random, it was deeply geospatial. Builders chose locations based on the energy of the land, often near water bodies, hilltops, or confluences of rivers. And these were not just geographical preferences, but spiritual decisions rooted in Vastu Shastra and cosmic alignment. For example, pilgrimage routes like the Char Dhams, Saptapuri, or Panchbhuta Sthalas formed elaborate network across the subcontinent. And these were not just paths to shrines, but spatial journeys of transformation. Uh, in this manner, geography itself became a spiritual guide where every bend in the river, every mountain pass held sacred meaning. And urban centers often grew around these sacred nodes. Cities like Ujjain, Varanasi, Kanchipuram are prime examples where religion and geography intertwined. And if we talk about the sacred geometry and orientation towards cardinal direction, it brings out and understand the importance of proximity to celestial or natural landmarks influence the city's layout. So now we can say that this sacred was not a separate domain. It was woven into how spaces were built, lived in, and remembered. And the land was not just occupied, it was revered. Now we move into some fascinating examples where spirituality, architecture, and geography come together. So let's begin with the Panchayatan Mandal. The five shrine layout, one central temple surrounded by four subsidiary shrines, was not just an aesthetic or religious choice. It was a kind of cosmic diagram mapping the cardinal directions and embodying elemental balance. And you can also find this layout in temples across India from Khajuraho to Bhubaneswar. Next, the concept of kshetras is not just sacred locations, but it's a spiritual geographies. A kshetra is a living landscape where divine presence, nature, and human life align. They have boundaries, mythologies, and rules that reflect deep ecological awareness. Now think of Sri Rangam, Kashi, or Jagannath Puri. These were spiritually governed spaces with geographical precision. Then we have stepwells like Adlaj Vav and Rani Ki Vav, which we had already discussed in the previous lectures. These are incredible examples of water architecture and sacred geography. Because they were not just water harvesting structures, but cooling chambers, places of worship, and cultural gathering points. Designed with attention to local hydrology, sun path, and seasonal shifts. Together, these illustrate that for ancient India, geography was sacred, water was wisdom, and space was a bridge between the human and the divine. Let's now explore the fascinating concept of Rita, the cosmic order that governs not just the universe, but our relationship with space, time, and morality. In Indian philosophy, Rita is the principle of cosmic law, the order that underlies both the natural world and human behavior. It's the foundation of the universe, and everything follows this rhythm. So, the geography was no exception to this cosmic order. The relationship between space and time in ancient Indian thought was cyclical, not linear. The cycles of the seasons, the movement of the planets, and the rhythms of the tides were all reflections of this cosmic law, influencing how people understood land, travel, and even moral choices. Desh or place and dharma or moral order were intimately connected. The place where one lived, the terrain, the climate, it all shaped one's dharma or moral duties. For instance, those living in forests or aranyas had different dharmic codes compared to those living in urban or desert environments. So the land itself guided ethical behavior, and this was mirrored in the practices and philosophies of the people. This deep connection between geography and morality shows that ancient Indian thinkers saw geography not just as a backdrop for life, but as a dynamic, living force that influenced human destiny and spiritual journey. As we wrap up today's lecture, let's reflect on some key takeaways from ancient Indian geospatial knowledge. The sacred geography was integral to ancient Indian thought, and geography was not just a physical concept but was intertwined with philosophy, morality, and spirituality. Temples, pilgrimage routes, and sacred landscapes were meticulously mapped and designed, blending cosmic order and geographical features. They serve as historical blueprints of how humans interacted with and respected the land. Now, Rita, the cosmic order provides a framework where geography and morality are deeply connected. Ancient texts illustrate how the land influenced not just physical existence but ethical and spiritual life also. Now, if we talk about its relevance to modern geography, these insights from these practices are extremely relevant today. As we look at sustainability, urban planning, and ecological balance, ancient Indian practices offer us models for understanding the land, our relationship with it, and the importance of balance. So, as we look at sustainability, urban planning, and ecological balance, ancient Indian practices offer us models for understanding the land, our relationship with it, and the importance of balance. So, thank you for your attention today, and I look forward to exploring these ideas further with you in the next session.